Hi everybody. So I want to get on with this series of videos about the topic of innuendo. All right, so here we go. Let's let me just show you some examples of innuendo. Uh, Innuendos often appear in everyday life and convey different moods. Okay, feigning. Feigning means pretending jealousy to subtly criticize. Okay, so just uh, take a listen to this. I wish I could just let my kids play games on the iPad all day like you do, right? So it's a criticism, uh, and they're basically saying, uh, I envy you so much because you can just allow your kids to play games all day, on the iPad, right? And uh, they're basically saying, I think you're a bad parent because you just let your children play on the iPad too much, right? But they say, I envy you, right? So you have to watch these. It's kind of like a backhanded compliment. It's kind of an insult, right? Okay, but not always. Sometimes it's sincere. Okay. Suggest Now this is a completely different situation. Suggesting there's something more to a seemingly innocent situation. So Allison's been spending a lot of time studying with Alex lately. You know, dot dot dot, right? And you're suggesting something. You're suggesting that something is going on, right? Uh, Maybe they're romantically involved, right? Um, Giving a backhanded compliment. A backhanded compliment is a kind of an insult, but you can't really notice, you know, uh, if it's a compliment or not. And so so you're so confident in wearing something that skimpy. Skimpy means like a skimpy dress is like uh, very small dress, right? So basically, they're trying to say you shouldn't wear that dress because you uh, you don't look good in it, right? Because you're maybe you're too fat or something like that. Okay. Uh, so I remember one day this girl that I work with, she gave me a backhanded compliment, which I knew what she was doing. She was pretty cool, right? Pretty cool girl. I liked her, so I allowed her to do this. It was sort of like she was insulting me, right? She So she comes up and she goes, "Oh, hello." She was British, right? She goes, "Well, you," and she looks down at my stomach. At that time, I was getting pretty fat, right? I've lost weight since then, but I'd gotten fat. And she goes, "You look well." And she looks down at my stomach. She goes, "You look well," right? And and I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, you're looking pretty well too, right?" And I looked down at her butt, right, because she was getting fat too, and we just laughed, right? Uh, so anyway, that was a kind of a backhanded compliment. Okay, so now I want to move on to another part of this. I could talk about language all day. Okay, so I want to talk about how in the past movies used innuendo a lot more than they do now. And they depended on it. Maybe they use innuendo these days still, but uh, but back then they needed it, okay, because they couldn't say certain things because of rules, all right, rules about television. television and movies.
Besides prohibiting things like...
Okay, so nudity, you couldn't have any nudity, but what they would do is they would just show somebody in the shower, and their leg would be, only their leg would be showing. So you knew that they were nude behind that curtain, right? You couldn't show it, so you had to use innuendo. And so somebody would have their back to the camera, right? And they would you could see them open their coat, and the person would look down and go, "Whoa!" Or, they would be surprised. So that's kind of like using innuendo. It's implying that the person is not wearing anything, right? So anyway, sex. So in the 1950s, married couples slept in separate beds on television, right? They would have two single beds, and that was actually the way the society was in the United States in the 1950s. For about 100 years, couples slept in different beds because the idea was that they would sleep better, right? And then it changed. Society changed, and then couples started sleeping in one big bed. Anyway, so sex, you couldn't talk about that. You had to use innuendo. And I'm going to show you a good example a little bit later. Violence, right? You couldn't show any violence. Oh, I should have remembered to do this, but if you watch the movie Psycho, that doesn't actually show any violence, right? All you see is this, all you hear is this scary music, and then you see, and then you might hear a scream or something like that, but you don't see any actual violence, and you might hear a noise, like a noise, but you don't actually see it, right? So there's you have to use innuendo. Okay, drug use. So they would not talk about drug use. They'd say something like, if they were talking about some pills, they would say, "Oh, this is mother's little helper," right? For talking about speed or something like that. Or they would say, "Oh, I'm going to go visit Mary Jane," right? And they would, we're talking about marijuana, so they would use innuendo. Or controversial issues, like back in, let's say, even more than 15 years ago, being openly gay was criticized a lot, right? So there weren't too many openly gays. So I'm going to show you an example of how they got around the topic, right? So let me show you an example here of good example of innuendo. Okay, so this is a movie, and it's called North by Northwest. I recommend you watch this. This is a great part of American history. So this is Cary Grant, and the story is kind of complicated, but he's a normal businessman, and this woman that he's talking to is like a spy, kind of like a spy. And so her job as the spy is to become acquainted with him so she can, I think it's so she can trick him into going to a place where he would be killed, right? So what she does is there are a lot of bad guys that are trying to catch him and kill him, right? Well, she pretends to try to help him, And she pretends to try to help him. Why is this? Okay. And right now, during this conversation, she is using innuendo to talk about sex, right? It's very clever the way they did it, I think. They used to have clever ways, and they used to be able to use innuendo a lot better in the past.
Oh, don't worry. I won't say a word.
How come?
I told you. It's a nice face.
Is that the only reason?
It's going to be a long night.
True.
And I don't particularly like the book I've started.
Ah.
You know what I mean?
Let me think. Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
Okay, so she didn't say, you know, I want you to come to my room tonight. Most women wouldn't do that anyway, right? Even these days, they will use innuendo, right? Because women don't want to be seen as, you know, just directly inviting somebody. So, because they kind of want it to be the man's idea, I guess. I don't know. Everybody's different, though. Okay, so she said, he said, why are you helping me? And why did you invite me into this car, right? And she said, well, she said, it's a nice face, means you have a nice face. And also, it's going to be a long night, and I don't particularly like the book that I have. Aha. And she said, you know what I mean? He goes, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean, right? So, that's a classic example of using innuendo to communicate your message. All right. I think that'll be it for this one, because I'm going to get into another one, which is a different part of the same movie. So I gotta find that spot. So, okay, that'll be it for right now, and then I'm going to put out the number 3 in just a few minutes. Okay. So I'll talk to you on the next idiom.